Hello everyone, my name is Lyndsay Archer and I am an aspiring physician, nonprofit founder, and children's book author. I am so honored to have the opportunity to speak about my book and on the importance of advocating for underrepresented youth in the sciences. Now, before I begin, I want to thank the Florida Association of Science Teachers for having me today, and I would like to take this time to thank all of you as teachers for advocating for children, especially during this time. Your commitment to pouring into and cultivating our youth each day makes a world of a difference for this generation and for generations to come. So, a little bit about me. I'm from Southfield, Michigan, a city right outside of Detroit. I graduated from Wayne State University in 2019 with a degree in African American Studies on the pre-medicine track, and most recently I graduated with my MBA in Healthcare Administration. Currently, I am working in pursuit of my medical school education, and when I'm not chasing my dream of becoming a doctor, I'm running my nonprofit organization, Rootstrong, and organizing outreach projects to empower youth through both education and literacy. I am also a children's book author and recently published my very first children's book, Fly, Dr. Fly, in July, and that's what brings me here today. So, a little bit about my book. It is a children's book that follows the journey of a young boy named PJ on his journey to becoming a doctor. And the story takes place in the rural countryside of Jamaica and explores how a curious and creative young boy gains inspiration from an unassuming new friend and a local healthcare hero to pursue medicine. The book not only provides a colorful storyline, but also very useful resources to support children and their parents on understanding the process of becoming a doctor. This story was actually inspired by my dad and a story that he would always tell me about kind of one of the first times that he really became intrigued by the sciences. And so I turned it into a book, used my imagination, turned it into a book, and really wanted to create something that inspires children to know that they can become doctors and to chase the full extent of their dreams, no matter what those dreams might be. But I really wanted to emphasize the importance of children being able to see themselves not only in literature, but also in the medical field. And so that's what this book is about. It provides a wonderful storyline in addition to some really great resources to help kids kind of foster those dreams of becoming a doctor. So I first started writing this book as a freshman in undergrad, and as I finished high school and started college, I began to realize just how important it was for Black and brown women and men pursuing specifically the medical field to be able to see themselves within the field. In my pre-medicine courses, it was very common for me to be one of only a handful of Black students in a class of over 300 students. And in those spaces, it was very easy to feel isolated. Today, the visibility of seeing Black women and men pursuing medicine has been made a bit easier with social media. However, the reality is that in the United States, Black physicians make up only 5% of the entire physician workforce. My mission in writing this book was to inspire Black and brown youth to see themselves in the medical field and to know that they can become doctors, a profession that society too often excludes Black and brown people from. And so the mission to diversify the medical field goes far beyond just creating imagery and representation, but also in creating tangible resources. Representation without resources does very little to create change, and this is where the work of teachers like you comes in. Black and brown students spend most of their day in school, and right now, seeing the world around them, the pandemic that's been happening, and seeing the work of healthcare workers is very new for a lot of young people. But at this time, we can also use this opportunity to tell young people that this is something that they can pursue and that the sciences very much is a space that they can enter in and be very transformative in. Science teachers have such a unique role in the lives of youth. They're tasked with teaching youth about the makings of the world around them, the intricate details of teaching youth about what makes them who they are, and the broad spectrum of the different concepts that make science so interesting. I have a very specific memory of being a second grader learning about scientists, and I remember at the time being interested in the ways that scientists could help the earth and climate change. And at that age, in addition to wanting to be a doctor, I wanted to be a scientist because anything that involved experiments was an exciting endeavor for me. But that spark of interest for that dream quickly died out. The image of the scientist that I was routinely exposed to in textbooks and the like did not look like me. According to my textbooks and the images I saw, scientists and people who made lasting impacts in science and in the world did not look like an imaginative black girl with kinky curly hair from the Midwest. If you ask any young person the top scientists they remember learning about as kids, you might hear very similar responses: Watson and Crick, Charles Darwin, Isaac Newton, and Rosalind Franklin. How amazing would it have been to learn about the roles of Black women like Katherine Johnson, Dr. Patricia Bath, the amazingness of Dr. Mae Jemison, who was not only the first Black woman to go to space, but was also a physician, is also a physician, and is also an engineer. How amazing would it have been to learn about the work of Annie Easley and Dr. Joycelyn Elders, Dr. Alexa Kennedy, even the engineering works of Madam C.J. Walker, who technically, by the world standards, was not an engineer, but certainly did work in STEM in inventing something that would transform the way that women, Black women in particular, would do their hair for generations to come. These kinds of women and these kinds of stories and narratives are important in letting children see things that they may not have necessarily associated with the STEM field. It's important to expose kids of all backgrounds to the diverse and expansive history of STEM, to let kids know that about the various people like Joycelyn Elders, like Madam C.J. Walker, like Mae Jemison, who have contributed to the space of STEM fields, and allow kids to see what has been done and how they can then make their own footprint and their own mark on the STEM field. So my mission in writing this book was to inspire kids to see themselves in a white coat. That does so much for young people, and it definitely did a lot for me growing up. My dad was that representation. I'm very privileged to have grown up with that tangible representation in my household, to be able to see that it was possible to pursue medicine as a physician, being able to see that within my own household. But what about the kids who don't have that immediate and accessible representation? It's important to make sure that kids not only see this in literature, but in real life. To be able to see themselves in these spaces does everything to support their dreams and to help them realize how they can then make a difference as well. There is so much value in creating representation, not only in literature, but in the STEM fields as well. And when the two can come together, it does so much for young children. Not just children of color, but also non-children of color. It gives kids of all backgrounds the access and the understanding to see diverse faces in diverse spaces. It allows children to see that, hey, this is the norm. This is, something that we should always strive for, diversity, and with that diversity, inclusion, and with that inclusion, equity in these spaces. And it allows young people to see and to understand that the mold of what is supposed to be, or what textbooks might, say is the typical picture or image of what a scientist looks like, what a doctor looks like, what a nurse looks like, what a coder looks like. It changes for kids when we're able to have representative literature and when we're able to have representative curriculum and teachings that does more than teach the concrete work of STEM, but also provides imagery and access to help kids know that they can do anything truly that they can and want to dream of. In a lot of ways, textbooks are wonderful in that they provide all the information that we ever need to know, right? But what about outside of the textbook? Not everything is textbook, right? When kids go home, they're going home to their different environments, to their different cultures, to their different households. And what we really want children to be able to do is take what they learn in school and apply it outside of the classroom. And so that's what makes representation so important. And it goes even farther into adulthood, as I'm now a 22-year-old I'm recognizing even more why representation is so important. I realized it growing up as a very young second grader. I realized it in high school. I definitely realized it in college. And now, as a post-grad individual pursuing my medical degree, it is very, very, very important for me to see representation in these spaces even now as I'm pursuing medicine, because representation does more than just for kids. It does everything for communities at large when it comes to people having access to accessible medical care, when it comes to the ways that men and women of different racial and ethnic backgrounds are treated when they seek medical care. All of these things start with representation, and all of these things start in the classroom and begin with access and begin with being able to see these images of themselves in these spaces. So, what can educators and teachers do to support underrepresented students in STEM? For this question, I actually consulted a few of my friends regarding what they thought would be most beneficial in their own experience when they were growing up. What ways did teachers, science teachers, support them on their journeys to their STEM fields? Or in what ways could teachers have done more to support them in their science courses? And the answers to this question were very, very, very diverse and very insightful. And so I'll share a lot of them with you here today. These answers came from friends who are pursuing their medical degrees, to friends who are working in very traditional and some working in non-conventional areas of engineering, to friends who are pursuing their pharmacy degrees. Some of the suggestions were that a lot of young people, myself included, really would have loved to have more representation in understanding the broadness of different STEM careers, knowing that there's more to just pursuing STEM than being an engineer or pursuing medicine as a doctor or, becoming working in IT. There's so much more to STEM than the broader terms of scientist. There's so much that can be done, and how the ways that STEM careers really can be used to do such transformative and positive things in the world, to solve everything from world problems and world issues like malaria to solving things like hunger and poverty, and helping to contribute to those spaces to elevate people and to positively impact the world. Another suggestion was that a lot of my friends wish they had more opportunities to connect with STEM professionals who looked like them, Black STEM professionals, brown STEM professionals, people who represented their backgrounds and looked like them, to show them that it was very much so possible to reach those heights and to aspire to achieve whatever it is that they set their minds to. Another example was to have more exposure to non-conventional careers in STEM. So going back to having more representation of the broadness in the different STEM careers. Today, I remember as a kid watching my mom take apart computers, and I knew what a motherboard was at a very young age. But my mom learned how to code on her own. And today we have these organizations like Black Girls Who Code that teach young girls about coding and how the very real world applications of how to code and what coding really does for our day-to-day functioning, everything from our apps to our favorite, video games, to all of these different things. Coding is at the core of it all. And so having these opportunities to teach kids about the non-conventional careers in STEM and how these different careers really do apply to real-world life and culture is a great way to connect science to the individual and getting kids to see themselves in these fields. This example is more so leaning towards college, but it is still very much so important, because what teachers do from elementary to high school in much of their teaching is to support kids as they pursue whatever it is that comes after high school, whether it be vocational school or seeking post-secondary education at a four-year university. And so a really, really great thing that I wish I had in high school at least was being able to have more opportunities to learn about the world of research. And one of my friends actually suggested that very same thing, having learning communities that introduce you to research opportunities. Because as a pre-med student and as an engineering student, a lot of times when you enter college, you have to conduct some form of research. But for a lot of Black and Brown students, it's difficult to find and to land those research opportunities because it's something that is so foreign to you. However, you have to have that experience. And being in college, time is moving very quickly, but if you don't know where to begin, it makes the process that much harder. And so having those opportunities and having those gateways to learning how to actually do research, what is research, why is it important, and also offering some examples of how research really does provide a framework of changing communities for the better would be very, very helpful. Having more STEM programs that engage both parents and students is another great example of how educators can support students in their science classes and in their STEM and in supporting their STEM interests. Having more hands-on learning experiences was another example given to me by a friend who's pursuing pharmacy but has had experience in engineering. Having more experiments and projects that are hands-on is a great way to expose kids to real-world applications of science. And giving children real-world experiments that they can apply in their own lives can give kids a different perspective on how they imagine how to solve world problems like poverty and hunger or serving in public health. Examples of some real-world applications of science that would make really great experiments would be learning how to make skincare or hair care products, something that people use every single day. But a lot of young people don't realize how much of engineering and chemical engineering goes into making those really amazing products that people use on a day-to-day basis. Another example would be learning about how to make a paper centrifuge and how projects like this have actually been used to diagnose malaria. Seeing more diverse women in STEM jobs in both textbooks or at least mentioned in class. For me, growing up, in my textbooks, there were no Black women or Black men working in STEM jobs that we learned about on the degree that we would learn about Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin and Watson and Crick. It was very much so a field. The sciences was a field that I felt, growing up at least, that, my textbooks were not representative of my aspirations, things that I was interested in. And it didn't show me that I personally, as a Black girl, could pursue the field. However, having that representation, either whether or not it's taught in the textbook, is still really, really important. And that's where teachers can really become advocates for underrepresented youth and for all students in teaching about those wonderful Black men, Black women, Indigenous men and women who have contributed to the STEM fields and have changed the world, because there are many, many, many that have done just that. Thinking back as a child, I remember that, as a kid, and as it is for many kids, children tend to do well in what they're most interested in. What they're most interested in ends up, in many ways, becoming what they're most passionate about. And so when I was growing up, science was still taught in a very rigid way, where there was very little room for creativity or exploration, which is the complete opposite of what science is. Science is indeed creativity and exploration and seeking and finding and using your curiosity. In many ways, what we learn about in school subconsciously contributes to our own personal worldviews of what we think we can and cannot do. And so when representation is not in our textbooks, in our curriculum, what does that do to young students of color? It tells a lot of young students of color, whether consciously or subconsciously, that they have not yet broken into that space and that they cannot enter that space. And so what makes representation so important is that representation alone is one thing. The imagery of seeing Black doctors and Black engineers and Black coders is one thing, but also creating those resources in the classroom to help support those dreams, to help continue to spark that fire of of interest and passion for the field is what really changes things for students. And that's how we work together from all fronts to make all of these spaces more equitable, more accessible, and we ultimately help everyone by making these spaces more accessible, because when students of color have access to entering these spaces and have that support system, it really does more than to just uplift the student themselves. It does everything to support the entire community. When students are able to see themselves in the subjects they're learning, the extent of their dreams and the things and the possibilities that they can achieve are boundless. So again, thank you so much to the Florida Association of Science Teachers for having me today on your platform during your annual conference. It has been such a pleasure, and I am so grateful to have been able to share my insights and some of my background with you and some of the things that I'm very passionate about in regards to STEM and representation. I hope that some of these suggestions can be a part of your curriculum in the ways that you teach, so that we can all be greater advocates for the kids that we serve, whether it be in the classroom or outside of the classroom. If you're interested in purchasing my book, in supporting youth, or any child that you might know who might be interested in my children's book, you can log on to www.lyndsayarcher.com and you can purchase your hardcover and signed copy right from there. Thank you guys so much for having me, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.